Hello, Blythe, Evie, Joe, Jack, Callum, Cadence, Lucy, Orion, and anyone else who's listening. Welcome to Story Time. Today's story is Daisy Head Mayzie by Dr. Seuss. This is the original version of the story illustrated by Dr. Seuss. And the dedication is to the ongoing presence of Theodore S. Geisel, Dr. Seuss. Thanks, Herb, Audrey Geisel. Herb is Dr. Seuss's agent, the person who was responsible for selling his books for him. Remember, we read Daisy Head Mayzie as it was illustrated by Joe Matthew a couple of days ago. This is Dr. Seuss's original version of the story with his original illustrations. So we'll see how different it is, okay? So the story begins. It's hard to believe such a thing could be true, and I hope such a thing never happens to you. But it happened, they say, to poor Mayzie McGrew. It happened like this. She was sitting one day at her desk in her school, in her usual way, when she felt a small twitch on top of her head. So Mayzie looked up, and she almost dropped dead. Something peculiar was going on there. A daisy was sprouting right out of her hair. Boing! Daisy looks a little bit different than the other Daisy, remember? Behind her was sitting young Herman Butch Strudel. This looks like a daisy up here on her noodle. Doesn't make sense. Wait, it couldn't be so. A noodle's no place for a daisy to grow. Then up spoke another boy, Einstein Van Tass, the brightest young boy in the whole of the class. It's a very odd place to be sprouting a daisy, but nevertheless one is growing on Mayzie. "Hey, look it!" cried Butch. "Right here in this room! Daisy Head Mayzie! She's bursting in bloom!" Miss Sneecher, the teacher, came rushing up quick. "Such nonsense! Some child is a-playing a trick. Which one of you boys stuck that thing in her hair? You know that a daisy could never grow there." "But, teacher," said Butch, "I saw the thing rise right out of her head with my very own eyes. Just give it a yank if you think I tell lies." So the teacher looks different in this version, doesn't she? Miss Sneecher had heard quite enough of this talk. "Mayzie, hold still. Let me get at that stalk." "Ouch!" hollered Mayzie. "Quit yanking," Butch said. "You're giving her pains. I'll bet that those roots go way down in her brains." Look at how happy Butch looks. The kids in the room started shouting like crazy. "Daisy Head, Daisy Head, Daisy Head Mayzie!" "Children, be quiet!" Miss Sneecher was puzzled. "Good grief and alas! To think this has happened right here in my class. I've taught in this room 20 years, maybe more, but I've never seen anything like this before. I'll have to report it. You'll just have to come to the principal's office and show Mr. Grum." Now remember, in the other version, Miss Sneecher picked Daisy Head Mayzie up and carried her out, but Mayzie is walking to the office in this one. Now the principal, good Mr. Gregory Grum, was a very wise man, just as smart as they come. He knew more than anyone else in this nation about long division and multiplication. He knew all the answers, why oceans are deep, why skies are so high, and why mountains are steep. He should have the answer to this thing on Mayzie. "My word," he declared.
It's a genuine daisy. I've seen them quite often in fields growing wild, but never before on the head of a child. Now what in the world ever made this thing sprout? I have no idea, but I'm going to find out." So the principal looks a little bit different too, doesn't he? And look at how Daisy's standing there straight like, what's going on? "It says daisies grow on the land. They grow between rocks. They grow also in sand. It mentions right here they can grow in a pot. But mention the head of a girl? It does not. Daisies, it says, sometimes grow in Alaska, also Missouri, Rhode Island, Nebraska. They grow in Japan and in Spain and Peru, in India, France, and in Idaho too. They grow in South Boston and also in Rome. But why should they grow on this little girl's dome?" Look at Daisy looking down, and they're looking in every book they possibly can find. "Say, look it," said Mayzie. "It's wilting," said Teacher. "How wonderful, Mayzie. It soon will be dead. You'll be rid of that daisy." "In just a few minutes our troubles will pass," declared Dr. Grum. "Take her back to the class." Then the principal saw a most terrible sight. The daisy was dying, and that was all right, but that daisy was part of poor Mayzie McGrew, and Mayzie was starting to wilt away too. "Teacher," said Grum, "you know what I think? They're both going to die. Hurry, bring them a drink. This is a problem," said Grum with a frown. "You take Mayzie away and you make her lie down. You lock her up tight in that room down the hall. There are quite a few numbers that I've got to call." Look, the water's been dumped on her head and the daisy's coming back, and so is Mayzie. "Get Maisie's mother on the end of the line. I need her here quickly while there is still time." Maisie's mom asked, "What's all the fuss?" "Goodness to Betsy, I'll be on the next bus." Now remember, in the other version, Maisie's mother was a welder. In this one, it looks like she's either working in a restaurant or she's working at home, but she's got that tray of dishes. A call to the shoe store reached Mr. McGrew. He answered while holding a customer's shoe. "She's growing a what? I'm coming right there." And he ran out of the shoe store with no time to spare. "A doctor should see her," the principal said, "and an expert on plants like the one on her head." So he called Dr. Eisenbart, who said, "Goodness gracious, a child with a head that is partly herbaceous? I simply must see this. I'll come over to you." And his patient, though shirtless, came to see it too. Oh my goodness. So they all look different, don't they, from the other story. Then Grum called Finch the florist, who grabbed for his shears. "I'll be there as fast as my truck can shift gears." Meanwhile, poor Mayzie lay down on a couch. The daisy slumped down on its stem in a slouch, but the window was open because it was warm, and the sweet-smelling daisy attracted a swarm of bees. Bees, bees, bees! Buzz! Ooh, they're all coming after the daisy. Mayzie jumped out the window. What else could she do? But the faster she ran, the faster they flew. In the park, she ran into Officer Thatcher. The bees on her heels were just starting to catch her. He said, "Wait a minute, kid, I'll be right back," and left Mayzie alone to fend off the attack. Remember, in the other story, Officer Thatcher caught them in his cap, but he's got a different plan in this version. But Thatcher returned with a fishbowl and bucket, into which went the fish from the bowl. Then he stuck it on top of her head. She felt like a fool. "Kid, I'm taking you back to your school." Look at her with a fishbowl on top of her head. Principal Grum didn't know what to do. "It's worse," cried Miss Sneecher, "much worse than we feared. The Daisy and Mayzie have both disappeared." Behind her came charging Mr. McGrew, chased by a customer chasing his shoe. Finch, the florist, Dr. Eisenbart, too, Dr. Eisenbart's patient, and Mrs. McGrew. So they're all coming to find out what's going on. Then the door opened, and in came poor Mayzie, wearing the fishbowl protecting her Daisy. Then Officer Thatcher, who looked all around, said, "Anyone know this kid that I found?" So there she is. Remember, before she came in through a window, but now she's being brought in by the officer with a fishbowl on her head, and the officer doesn't know who she is. "Mama!" cried Mayzie as she ran to her mother, but Mrs. McGrew stepped back with a shudder. "I think I feel faint," she just managed to utter. "Stand back!" yelled the doctor as he looked about. "Allow me some room to examine her sprout." The doctor approached, stethoscope to his ear, but the wail of a siren was soon all he could hear. So remember who comes in next? "His Honor the Mayor!" And then without warning, the door opened wide, and who but the mayor should step right inside. At acting important, there was none to compare. He was best at long speeches chock full of hot air. "I promise, my friends, that if I'm re-elected, this Daisy on Mayzie will be disconnected. The law of our fathers is simple and sound. Daisies belong and should stay in the ground. The rest are illegal, will bar them from town." So see, everybody looks different. And I don't think the mayor was announced, His Honor the Mayor, when he came in the other version. But look at the look on Maisie's face, and look at her father looking down at her like, what? Then just as the mayor finished his talk, Finch the florist began to quietly walk, and standing directly behind Mayzie, said, "I know the way to get rid of a daisy. So there's a flower between her two ears? I'll snip it clean off with my sharp pruning shears." But Mayzie, she saw him and let out a screech. She pushed him aside and raced out of reach. Now remember, in the other version, then there's this finagle guy who comes in and wants to be her agent and make big bucks out of selling things with Daisy Head Mayzie on it. But in this version, Mayzie ran from the school, headed straight out of town. She came to a meadow and fell to the ground. With her head in her hands, she lay all alone. Her heart, it was broken. She could never go home. "Nobody loves me! Nobody loves me! Nobody loves me!" she cried. Nobody loved her? Poor Mayzie McGrew. It's hard to believe such a thing could be true. And maybe that's why then this Daisy above, when Mayzie below began talking of love, well, you know about daisies. When love is in doubt, the job of a daisy is try and find out. So the daisy starts plucking its own petals. They love her not. They love her, they love her not. "Don't worry, Mayzie," said her daisy, as its last petal fell. "They love you." Then the stalk disappeared. Well, that's how it all happened. The thing went away, and Mayzie McGrew is quite happy today. Back at her studies and doing just great in all of her subjects in room number 8. And concerning that daisy, you know that it never grew out of the top of her head again, ever. Well, it practically never popped up there again, excepting occasionally
just now and then. Ding! And after all, I'm getting used to it. The end. So these are the pictures of the covers from the first edition that came out in 1995, and then the second edition that just came out 4 years ago in 2016. The top edition was illustrated by John Matthew, and the bottom edition was illustrated by Dr. Seuss. And then a page from the 1976 book, The Cat's Quizzer, which was done by Dr. Seuss. What would you do if you sprouted a daisy? Would you run and see your dentist? Would you water it and grow more of them and sell them to your friends? Or would you try to grow some roses? They're worth a lot more. And nobody really knows why Dr. Seuss never continued with it. He just put it in a drawer and was found later by his wife. But the character stayed on his mind because in a book that he did called The Cat's Quizzer in 1976, he introduces the character Daisy Head Mayzie with a daisy growing out of her head. Now, here are some illustrations. The first one is from the book that came out in 1995, and you remember that's the teacher, Miss Sneecher, that's trying to pull the daisy. And then the other one is from Dr. Seuss's version, and you can see how different they are. And then remember the person in the 1995 book that tried to get her to sign the contract because he wanted to sell things with her name and picture on it. And then here are examples of the sketches that Dr. Seuss did to create the story. And then this is a image of something that Dr. Seuss did I ever tell you how lucky you are? And you can see it's colored, and then he has it marked with numbers to show exactly what colors he wants in the final illustration. That's kind of interesting. And then, of course, here's Dr. Seuss Geisel. Theodore Seuss Geisel, Dr. Seuss. He was born in March of 1905, and he died in September of 1991. And aren't we lucky that we have all of these books that he wrote for us? Well, I hope you like that story, and I hope you like seeing another version of it, especially seeing the one that Dr. Seuss originally did. Tomorrow's story will be More, Said the Baby by Vera B. Williams, and I think you'll like it. So take good care of yourselves, keep loving on each other, always love yourself, and always remember that I love you to the moon and back. And we'll be back together tomorrow for story time when we read More, Said the baby. More, said the baby. Bye-bye.